Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Kamila Knight, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees for the Montclair Fund for Educational Excellence and the co-chair of the American and Me Committee. I'm also a proud graduate of Montclair Public Schools with Montclair High School class of 2009. I'm particularly excited to have student change leaders here tonight. MFEE started developing the work in the fall of 2018 with the goal of seeding 25 diverse learning circles to deepen participants' racial literacy and to spark individual and collective action. This goal was rooted in the belief that real change on issues of race and equity will not come until we start having real talk. Talk that is grounded in a shared understanding of racism, oppression, and advantage. Talk that builds a common lens for identifying racism both externally and within ourselves. And most importantly, talk that sparks a shared sense of urgency for dismantling it. People, particularly Black leaders in our community, have been at the front of this work for decades, and they continue to push for schools and communities that are more just. We thank them for their tireless efforts in tirelessly running this marathon. And we see the American and Me process as equipping folks to meaningfully join them in the race. We've been overwhelmed by the response to this work. Here's a snapshot of the engagement and responses that we've received from participants. To date, the process has engaged over 600 people. And after this fall, we will have trained over 50 people to lead the challenging discussions on race and equity with their friends, neighbors, and colleagues. Tonight, you'll get a peek at what this process looks like. You'll also get a sense for some of the frameworks that are used to build our shared understanding and how we apply those frameworks to the America to Me films. We use the films as a common text, as a way to start the conversation. This work, however, is very personal. We ask our participants to use this experience as a way to do an archaeological dig of the self, to unpack their own understandings of race, racism, and advantage, and to use what they learned to shape some action, big or small. We want to thank the Schumann Fund for New Jersey and Partners for the Health Foundation for their early support of this work. We could not have launched it without their contributions. And now I'll hand it over to MFEE Executive Director, Maciel Rodriguez Vars, to share a little bit about MFEE and how the America to Me process has sparked our own action steps. Maciel.
All right. Thank you so much, Kamila. We are very lucky to have you on the MFEE board. You have been such a great partner in this work and really learned a lot from you. So thank you for being on the board with us. First, I want to also just give a shout out and to thank all of you who are joining us tonight. We're so excited and honored that so many of you have decided to spend this evening with us. We know you're busy. We have local leaders, we have district administrators, Board of Ed members, teachers, students, media folks. Really, thank you all for joining us here tonight. We know that these are very challenging days and that it's hard to stay hopeful. But we hope that you'll be energized by the speakers you hear tonight and that you'll be inspired to find your own ways to dismantle racism and injustice. We know that Montclair is by no means a perfect community, but we also know that this community has a very strong history of fighting racial injustice. And there are many folks, particularly our Black leaders, who are continuing today to address inequality. And there's a growing will to support those leaders. And most importantly, a growing acknowledgement that change has to start within each of us. For us at MFEE, the America to Me work is foundational to everything else that we do. As a bit of background, MFEE is the local education foundation that supports the Montclair Public Schools. Our mission is to create equitable access to high quality education for all 6,700 Montclair Public School students, and we do it through a variety of different ways. We are a fundraiser, we are a community connector, and we're a grant maker. We make grants to teachers, to staff. We also provide larger grants to support district initiatives. And supporting this process, the America to Me process, better equips us and all of our educational stakeholders to address racial inequity that is critical to our mission. Our board of directors experienced the American Me process themselves, and their work inspired them to allocate $150,000 to fund grants to address issues of race and equity in Montclair public schools. We want to share just a little info about those grants with you tonight, because our hope is that the American Me process will spark additional ideas for how to spark change in our schools. So we're calling these our Excellence and Equity Grants. We are funding a total of $150,000 in proposals that will go to all of our 11 schools, $10,000 for our elementary and middle schools, and $50,000 for Montclair High School. So please learn more about these on our website. We'll have some more information coming out in the coming weeks. It's important to note that the board wants these proposals to be collaboratively shaped, so they should be shaped by a diverse group of stakeholders that include teachers, administrators, parents, and even our students where applicable. So like I said, please review our guidelines on the website, and we look forward to getting your proposals. So for tonight, I'm going to just throw up a slide in a little bit. Here we go, that shows how we're organizing the evening. Part one will be a discussion with our Montclair High School student activist Genesis Whitlock and Professor Lewis Mccoy. That portion is going to end around 7:20-ish, and then we'll move into our workshop on the 4 I's of oppression and advantage that will be led by our amazing Montclair professors, Tanya Maloney and Bree Pickauer. Doctors Maloney and Pickauer are really fantastic, so please, if you have the time, stay on for that. If you are a watch group facilitator, if you have already signed up to be a watch group leader this fall, please stay on. This is your first session, so we want to see you here. So we'll have a link at the end of the 7:20 session so that you can go to the next Zoom. And anybody who's interested in participating in the fall process as a member, or even if you're just curious about what this is all about, please join us. You'll get a little peek at that process. So before I introduce our speakers, I want to share just a little bit about why we chose them. As Kamila shared earlier, the core of the America to Me process is to equip our community to have deep and informed conversations about race, racism, and advantage. This quote from our speaker tonight, Professor Lewis Mccoy, captures why this work matters. So we're just gonna, I'll give you a little minute just to read through the quote. Rolling Acres is a community that Professor Lewis Mccoy writes about in his book, Inequality in the Promised Land, Race, Resources, and Suburban Schooling, and it is very applicable to us here in Montclair. We believe that the America to Me process is helping all of us to stop talking and walking around race. We need to equip ourselves with the understanding, with the vocabulary, and the endurance to have deeper conversations about race, to not be afraid to talk about race, and to enter into these conversations knowing that we have to also acknowledge and accept that racism is very real in our own community. We need to name how it's happening here in Montclair, and we also need to own it when we perpetuate it ourselves. Only then can we contribute to the meaningful individual and systemic change that Dr. Lewis Mccoy is talking about. Because racism is indeed consequential for people of color in Montclair, and several folks have been calling the community's attention to it for decades. But tonight we wanted to share more recent stories from our teens. At the Unity March in June, Black Montclair High School students shared their experiences, what they have endured in the schools and in our community. So we wanted to share just a little bit of some of the experiences that our students put forth on that day. Again, I'll give you some time to look over these. And we know these are hard to absorb. We share these with our watch group participants, and many were not aware of the pain and the injustice that our Black students face. These are real experiences, and they reflect what Dr. Lewis Mccoy states and calls is the fabric of inequality that's embedded in suburban communities like Montclair, and what we need to help dismantle. The students have not only shared their experiences, they've also created a list of demands for change in our district and in our community, and we'll share those later. part of why we invited our Montclair High School student leaders to this forum today was to understand how we as adults can start to support their work. Because the American and Me process is not only seeding deeper individual racial literacy, it's also inspiring action. And the best way to action is to follow the lead of BIPOC who are doing this work. There are many groups in town addressing racial inequity in our schools. Please support them. For this event, we wanted to highlight our youth. So we're gonna introduce our two speakers tonight. We're so honored to have Genesis Whitlock, who helped organize the Unity March that drew over 4,000 people in June. She's co-created the set of demands for school district change that are so thoughtful and comprehensive. She continues to mobilize and train her peers to ensure that these demands are addressed. Genesis is a senior at Montclair High School. She's the Student Coalition President. She's co-president of the NAACP Youth Council, and she is the first ever student representative on the Montclair Board of Education. We are equally excited to have NYU's Sociology of Education professor, R. LaRue Lewis McCoy, who is the author of Inequality in the Promised Land, Race, Resources, and Suburban Schooling, which examines the experiences of low-income and racial minority families' attempts at accessing school-related resources in an affluent suburb much like Montclair. Professor Lewis McCoy is a scholar activist with years of experience of working with grassroots organizations, non-for-profits, and school districts. His research concentrates on educational inequality, particularly focused on the intersecting roles of race, class, and place. And his work has appeared in multiple academic journals. He is a frequent media contributor and public speaker, and he also co-leads the Indugo and Nziga African Rites of Passage program. So we are lucky that both of these very busy individuals have joined us tonight, and we have a lot to learn. So just as a point of logistics, we are going to use the Q&A to take messages from the audience, of messages of support and affirmations. And also if you have some questions about what you're hearing and or your role to support racial equity work in Montclair. We may not have time to get to all of the questions, but we do have a moderator that will help to at least get some forward to Genesis and Professor Lewis McCoy. So first, we'd love to get a little context from each of you about the work that you're doing. And I wanted to start with Professor Lewis McCoy. Can you share just a few words about your scholarship and why it's particularly relevant to predominantly white suburban communities like Montclair?
Thanks for having me, Maciel, and for everyone involved in this. For me, as an African-American male, I grew up in a suburban community. And one of the first things that I came to understand was that my experience as a Black male was different than my neighbors, my classmates. And so when I started to think about what inequality looks like, so often people think, well, everyone inside of the city is one color, everyone outside of the city is another. If you've made it to the suburbs, things are really good. You've reached the promised land. But the truth of the matter is that oftentimes for families that are Black, that are brown, that are lower income, when you reach places like Montclair, while it may be a step up, there are still challenges that we face. And so most commonly we hear about things like the achievement gap, or maybe we hear about disproportionality, who gets suspended or who gets access to AP classes. And while all those things matter, what I'm even more concerned about is really the everyday fabric of inequality. What does it mean to be Black and go to Montclair High School and be both invisible and also hypervisible? What does it mean to be Latinx and to find yourself as a part of a community, but not have your experiences centered? And what does it mean to be a white member in the community who's committed to justice, but not recognizing the ways that your own actions can also hoard opportunities, how you can gain access to valuable courses or resources and wall them off to other families? So for me, much of my work is trying to understand the dynamics of interaction between groups, but also figure out what does justice look like in a space that many people think is already integrated, that many people think is already successful, and really make sure that the full chorus of voices is brought to the center. For me, I feel like we can do that by really centering a need to understand race and not race simply as a taboo, but race as a resource, as a place to start conversations, as a place to engage power, and as a place to really create the opportunity so many folks claim that they have in spaces like Montclair, but hasn't been actualized for all.
Thank you. No, I think that's really helpful. And I have a million questions, but I'm going to introduce Genesis, and hopefully we can get to some of those questions. So Genesis, can you share a few words about what motivated you and your peers to organize the Unity March in June, and what shaped the formation of your student demands?
Yeah, so I can speak to my experience as one of the main organizers of the Unity Walk. So initially, I've always been, or I haven't always been, I recently became super involved in social advocacy around 10th grade. Before that, I was that model student that the professor recently described. Like, I believed that because I was in the suburbs and because I was in a town like Montclair that was already believed to be super diverse and integrated and the paradise for people of color, when I moved here, I thought that the hatred that I was receiving was like unique to me. And that was I moved from a place where everybody was Black. I was originally from Antigua in the Caribbean before, where I wasn't conscious of my Blackness. And I received like these covert forms of discrimination and overt forms of discrimination. And I couldn't really understand any of them. And so I kind of normalized that behavior because I didn't have the words to articulate it, because there weren't any conversations happening around me. So it took a lot for me to seek out those resources to understand, why do I feel this way? I know, why do I feel so marginalized? And I didn't really understand it until I started surrounding myself with other people, other Black students who were in my classes. And we all had similar feelings and these patterns, just like we kept seeing them recur. And so we decided to, I've on my own have tried to engage in conversations with people, but as like a Black student in Montclair, I feel like I constantly have had to de-weaponize or package my experience in a way that is tangible for other people, or easy or palatable for other people, I should say. And so I knew it's bizarre that we had to use the murder of so many people as an opportunity to have our voices heard, but we saw that since so many people were engaged, that we could finally integrate our experiences, because like the professor mentioned earlier, these conversations aren't being had in suburbia. It's so easy to point at places in Chicago, places in Virginia and Alabama, but like not talking about where we are and what's happening here. So we used what was going on in the country to amplify our voices. And so what I did is collected those responses of the discussions that I've had with people from 10th grade to last summer. And I printed thousands of copies and I spread them all over the park once we had people organized, because if this is the time that we had people to listen to us, we wanted to have pages and pages and pages of responses for people to read. So that is like the point, or the real purpose as to why we formed this march. It's that we knew that it was sadly like one of our only opportunities to have people listen to us. So we dropped everything and did what we could. And because we are invisible but so hyper aware as Black people in suburbia, we've had to navigate so many different areas and think about how we can practice diplomacy and always speak in a way that doesn't upset anybody, that everybody will understand. So we have some like superpowers with dealing with this like oppression for so long. And in a weird way, I think it really equipped us with being able to put this together, because like, I think a lot of people underestimated our ability to organize and to really have our voices heard, because for so long we've had to navigate those spaces by being soft-spoken. But yeah, I'm just really glad that we've seen this momentum persist. And that's mainly because we finally have proof of what it looks like when Black students speak up. Like, it's not, oh, you're really brave, like a pat on the head like we were used to seeing, and people asking us to put our experiences in a Google form to address racism. Like, we're seeing actual change. And so that's kind of why I'm still doing what I am. Granted, I was a bit burnt out because like it's a lot to put it together, but that's sort of why I do what I do right now. I really just want to continue to empower marginalized voices, because marginalized voices meaning Black students, the low-income students, the ones that are pushed on the outskirts that we don't want to hear from. Those are the ones who know exactly what is wrong with our district. So I'm trying to do what I can to make it a safer space for those students to speak up and advocate alongside me and my fellow organizers.
Thank you, Genesis. I think, you know, many of us are in awe of what you and your peers are doing. I mean, not just for that one march, but the way that you're continuing to support each other and really be so strategic in the ways that you are organizing yourselves and helping your peers to learn advocacy skills. Like, that is very impressive. And I know it's taxing. I just wanted to share, we do have a slide that shares all 5 of the demands that the high school students have put together. And I just wanted to point it out for those of you who haven't seen them. One, because as I said before, they're very comprehensive, right? Like, I think they really speak to what Professor Mccoy talks about when he talks about the fabric of inequality. They're not just looking at the opportunity gap. They're not just looking at, you know, they're looking at some really specific ways that we could make change in our schools. And then they're looking at the big picture, right? This notion of how we change the culture. That talks about having dialogues like this, right? That and establishing student task force against racism and discrimination, and really engaging their voices, because clearly they really have shown great leadership, and we should not only be listening to them, but we should just be following their lead. So Professor Mccoy, I wanted to kind of pull it back to you to help us think about how, or actually I'll start with Genesis and then I'll go to you, Professor Mccoy. Genesis, you know, we've seen the demands, and for those of you who haven't seen them, please, you can look at the full demands at Genesis's Instagram page, which is on the slide. But I'm curious, I'm just going to cut to the chase. You know, like, you have 150 adults in this space right now who are, I think, pretty eager to hear how they can support student change leaders. And what would be, you know, some advice to you? And again, you know, we have to do our own work, but if we can help us think it through, like how we can be co-conspirators to the students who have articulated these demands and are doing their own work.
You know, you always ask me that question, and I always tell you, I'm always like, thank you so much, Maciel. When I figure that out, I will get back to you, because it's like recently, I've always, when I was younger, when I was trying to navigate these experiences, I always looked to adults, and I was like, well, I wanted to look to adults, and I didn't really know like how to do it right. I was always so nervous about asking for help and communicating with adults, like when I needed it most. And so, and like a lot of students are, and I think I'm just so, I don't know, I guess I'm just still so surprised by how engaged like students are, and how we've all served as like a support system for one another. Like, we can call each other and we can have these really healing conversations. We can map out solutions together. Like, it's really bizarre to me. And I still like so greatly appreciate the help of adults and people in the community who want to help us. I'm so sorry to give you this answer for like the 10th time, but when I will definitely, when I can think of something, I will definitely be there to ask for help now, because like, again, I'm just so happy that that line of communication is open, and that I promise you, like, when I'm able to, I can definitely articulate the things that I need. I think it's just, well, I do have a bit of an answer actually. For teachers, be open to having conversations about race in class. Very simple. Parents, be open to having conversations about race in class. Or about having conversations about race and the intersection of education and everything. I don't know, that's it. Just because conversation rejects the normalization that race doesn't happen in Montclair. So conversation is really where it starts. And I guess through conversation, I can figure out if there's anything deeper that I need. But like I said, we're running a really grassroots campaign right now, and right now we're still like meeting all the new members and everything that we interviewed who's gonna continue this campaign with us. And so I don't think we need much right now, but I promise you, you'll be the first person to know.
No, I mean, that makes total sense. And I'll turn it over to Professor Lewis Mccoy, because I think, from your research and your experience and looking at other communities, I think you have some really great advice for folks, and really how, as adults, what the roles that we should be playing and what we should be paying attention to in ourselves and as a group. So I'll turn it over to you, Professor McCoy.
Great. So the first thing I have to say is, like, Genesis is incredibly humble, because I got a chance to meet them, I think, last week. And the first thing I did as an adult was just listen, right? So when you listen to young folks articulate their experience, don't listen with an ear to respond, listen with the ear to understand, right? So all of us as adults suffer from adultism. We look at the world through our eyes, we look at the world through our experience, we remember our childhood. And when working with young people and trying to become co-conspirators, sometimes instead of like standing in support and listening and building from a youth center perspective, we do it from our perspective. We're like, wait, well, you shouldn't use those words, or you should only speak up in this way, or maybe this dress is most appropriate. And many times that lens is actually crushing the power of youth and also restricting the potential of change. One of the most beautiful things about the work that these young people are doing is that they're leading it. There have been people for decades talking about, what are we going to do about Montclair? What are we going to do about schools? What are we going to do about racism? And instead of simply asking, what are we going to do? These young people said, we are doing. So our first job is to listen differently. Our second thing is to check our adultism, right? I think the third thing to do is to educate ourselves. If we're going to listen, we have to listen differently. And so that education, one, does not have to come on the backs of BIPOC or youth. Meaning you don't have to find someone who's Black or brown and say, teach me everything I need to know about racism. You don't have to find a young person and say, hey, what's it like to be young in 2020? And once you've spent all your time explaining yourself and your life, I'll go off and say like, wow, that was really great. I learned a lot, and they're drained. Instead, think about the ways in which they've already done some public teaching. So it could be going to Genesis Instagram page. It could be going to Black at MHS. I think that's the Instagram handle. It could be going to Mccoy. There are all these ways that young folks have found a way to collect the voices and experiences of people navigating Montclair, and go and learn and say, wow, that resonates with me. It reflects my experience. And also, wow, that's something I never even thought about. And then I think the next thing that a good adult co-conspirator has to do is become accountable. They have to become accountable to not only themselves, but a community that they're around. So if you want to actually work with young people, you have to listen to young people, you have to support young people. But when young people say, hey, Marcia, I feel like in that meeting, you seem to talk a whole lot. And we had all prepared our notes, and we didn't get to speak. And then say, wait a second, you're right. You know what? There is a way that I can take up space that is actually space that other folks should have. Because the truth of the matter is that no one is silent. Sometimes adults think I'm speaking up for young people who haven't had a chance to speak up. No one is silent. People are only silenced. So our job is to make sure that their voices are amplified. Our job is to make sure that their work is supported. Our job is to help them see a little bit further down the road. And if we do that, I think we actually move closer to having something that looks like the world we want.
And Genesis, I just wanted to check in with you on if, how that resonates. I think that's super valuable to hear, like when we take up more space than really we should be taking up. And also, Genesis, actually a second question, because I know that this has come up and you mentioned it a little bit, and something for us to be mindful too, and ways that we can just advocate for this, is that you've noted that the work that you've done and really just being a Black student at Montclair High School is really challenging on your mental health. And I wondered if you wanted to share a couple of words about that.
Yeah, so thank you for asking me that question, because I seldom get that question now that like all the hype is over and we're working kind of underground and like not in front of everybody. My mental health, I've been like, I've been doing pretty well, honestly, like, because like I said, I'm able to set those boundaries, thankfully. I just know I can speak like sort of generally from what I know, is that it's really difficult to first experience that trauma and then also know that you're obligated to react to it publicly. Like, I'll try to explain it a little more. I mean, when George Floyd was murdered, I think between that Friday and maybe like the next Friday, I got like 250 DMs. And like I made pacts with my friends. I was like, okay, we're just not going to respond. We are going to take a second and we are going to lie back. We're maybe going to go to a protest or two, but we're really going to prioritize ourselves right now. And I went to bed that night being awakened, like with a bunch of messages like, hey, are you not planning a protest? What's wrong? Like, aren't you the activist girl? Where's the protest? And it was just like so weird, because then you start to feel this guilt alongside with this obligation on top of not really being able to process that trauma. And then one more feeling, it's like that fear, like this will only be a moment. If I don't act right now, the suburban moms are going to give up on me. Like they're going to get bored, or you know what I mean? And so it's all those emotions that are so hard to navigate. And I think Black students we're so hyper aware already that we can see all of those things happening. Like we can see that fear happening. We can see that like feel like we can see the feeling of those obligations. Does that make sense? And it's just really hard because none of that fits into what we want to see, you know? And I think people I think have normalized seeing me get up to speak and screaming and crying, but I don't think, and people, or not me in particular, but people expect some of my friends to get up to be the ones screaming and crying, and then they expect me to be the ones to speak very eloquently and use words that I just learned in the dictionary. Like I think we have such a like finite expectation for Black people once they're accepted in suburbia that like they don't have much wiggle room to exceed beyond those expectations. So it's really hard for me to like process everything that I'm feeling in that confine, where I'm really nervous about not meeting somebody's expectation, because once I don't, then I can sort of be outcasted. Because I feel like I've done a lot I am pretty humble. I need to work on that, because I need to feel proud of myself sometimes, if I'm being honest. And I think that's effective. That's an effect of internalized colonialism and oppression. But I think that, oops, I just lost my place. I'm sorry about that. Oh.
No, it's totally fine. I think, you know, I'm curious, Professor McCoy, just because I saw Louis McCoy, I saw you nodding your head, and you obviously have been an activist as well. Like, do you have, can you relate to what Janice is saying, or do you have some additional comments to respond to Genesis?
Yeah, no, I can definitely relate to what Genesis is saying. I'm frankly excited because the lessons that Genesis is talking about slowing down, figuring out if you're going to attend a protest, slowing down and figuring out how do people see you, what are the limited boxes that they've placed around you. I didn't get those lessons until much later. So for Genesis to have them at this point, I'm like, that's important, right? Mm-hmm. I'm also overjoyed because can you imagine what it would have meant for decades for people who were activists to have public conversations about mental health? Could you imagine what our communities and the fruit of our labor would look like? Because sometimes we've said over and over, you've got to push the person to the front. We need the spokesperson. And we've pushed the spokesperson to the front, and they've had so much pressure and they've crumbled. We've also forgotten about the center people, the people who do the work every day whose names you don't know, right? So there is something very important about taking care of yourself, right? As Audre Lorde said, you know, self-care is not being selfish. It's a radical act of love. It's revolutionary. And so to hear about the work that Genesis and her compatriots are doing is so important, because too often we think, wow, we're proud of you because you spoke up. Wow, we're proud of you because you wrote the editorial. Wow, we're proud of you because you made the walk. But we also don't say enough of, wow, we're proud of you because you took some time for yourself. Wow, we're proud of you because you were being baited and you were like, not today, right? The ability to push on the brake is equally as important as pushing on the gas when you're organizing for the long term.
I think,
go
ahead, Genesis. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say I remembered my place, and that point is actually what like kickstarted it. I think that exactly. I completely agree, and I think that so many people are. I think for me, I joined this community for social justice because that's exactly what I needed. I needed a community, and I think that when I found that it was my passion and I fully engaged into it, I started being pushed out to the front where I no longer had access to this community, but I still had that obligation to be like this figurehead. And I don't know much about anybody who's been like me before. In Montclair specifically, I want historical context to know who that is. That's a separate conversation that needs to happen. I need to know who came before me. But it's this huge pressure to be the first and to be the only person, to feel like you're speaking on behalf of everybody, because now I feel like the black kid and the one black kid in the AP class is all over again, where I have to be so mindful of what I say and how I maneuver. Like, that's not the goal. The goal is for me to unapologetically express myself and feel just as safe as a white kid. And so I'm doing that in the long term, but I'm not doing it for myself. I feel like, again, I'm back in this situation where I have to sacrifice myself for this long-term goal that I have yet to like fully see, you know. And I'm optimistic and I'm willing to do that, absolutely. It's just that it shouldn't be normalized for Black girls, for young Black girls, to have to sacrifice themselves and have to push themselves out to the front. And yeah, I wish that I love that the way that I speak is recognized and the power that I have is recognized, but I really appreciate the messages when people are like, you are so busy and I'm so glad that you're not responding to my message. Thank you. Like, I've gotten those messages, and those are the ones that really make my week, because sometimes I don't even know when to check in with myself and be like, I'm burnt out, because that like standard and like my way to figure all of that out has been completely misconstrued because of how much I worked like over the summer to put everything together.
No, I really appreciate hearing the conversation between the two of you on this, because I think it is something that it isn't an issue that many of us pay attention to, and the cost of doing the advocacy work that you both do, and you know, Genesis, you know, kind of being so young and having to bear this. And there's certainly lots of people in town that I'm sure we're seeing in the chat who would be happy to talk to you to give you historical context, but we will all be mindful of what Professor Lewis McCoy has said to us, to check our adultism too, and to, you know, see Genesis as the leader that she is, but to really to kind of share, and for you all to kind of have that camaraderie of doing this work in this town. So I wanted to just also, we're getting a fair number of questions in the chat, and we have a few minutes. So if you all are okay, there was a question in the chat actually, and Professor Lewis McCoy, because we have you here and your expertise is really looking at issues of race and equity in predominantly white communities. There's a question about if you could talk a little bit more about hoarding opportunities and what it looks like in this time of virtual pod learning, and what white parents can be doing, and what they might be avoiding right now. And I'll turn it to Dr. Lewis McCoy, but Genesis also, I'd be curious, because certainly I'm sure you've also seen a little bit of that as a student at Montclair High School. But Dr. Lewis McCoy, if you could address that question.
Yeah, no, I think the context of the moment is that most people are uncertain about what tomorrow looks like. And most families want safety and stability. Most families want their kid to have a good chance to learn. Most families want their kids to have an opportunity to interact with peers, to do the good social, emotional development. And those needs are important to be met. But the reality is that COVID itself, while it's impacted everyone and everyone is vulnerable, everyone's not vulnerable in the same way, particularly folks who have been made vulnerable by racism and classism and ableism. They have a whole different experience. So if you are lower income, if you're living near the poverty line, when COVID hit, it's kind of like if you think about being on the Titanic and COVID is the iceberg. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, the folks who are living check to check, they got knocked into the water. Some had life vests, others had nothing, and they're trying to, you know, tread water. And that looks like going to online learning, but not having actual access to stable internet, not having actual access to the appropriate tools to interact with the online learning systems. It looks like being told, hey, get the assignments in because we assume that there's someone there who can walk you through them, right? And then there are other folks who are kind of like more middle class, right? People who had more of an opportunity to shift their life. Maybe when COVID hit, you got a chance to work from home. You know, that home office that you only went into occasionally, you go into every day, or maybe you can afford daily childcare. And so that's kind of like having a life raft. And I think it makes sense to me. But we also have this third category that's emerged really rapidly, which is this pandemic pod, which does the childcare thing, right? Which does the learning thing. But instead of talking about a life jacket or a life raft, folks are getting in speedboats. They're saying, how do I get a small group of families together and hire a private tutor or a private teacher? And they're actually getting in speedboats and they're leaving the scene. They're leaving people behind. For me, what it means is that in a moment of crisis, we have to figure out what we look like as a community. We tell young people every day, like, I believe in this community is so amazing, it's so diverse, it's all of these things. But in the midst of a crisis, if you only go to your network, we know that these pandemic pods are more segregated than our schools are and more segregated than our neighborhoods are. They're usually composed of folks from the same racial and ethnic group, from the same class position, from the same linguistic background. That's when you literally have to check yourself and be like, oh my gosh, I'm doing good for my child. I formed a pandemic pod, and everyone's college educated and everyone only speaks English. This is a moment where folks have to think about how those choices have collateral impacts. Now, I actually had a great chance to meet you, Maciel, and some other folks who were saying, how do we build out supports within the community for families who are more vulnerable? So whether that's a community-based system like learning hubs, or maybe you are a family that has to ask the question and say, hey, look, I'm not living check to check, but I may have a little bit of resources to spend. I may have the ability to contribute to the pot. How do you contribute to the pot? It's not about giving up everything you have, but all forms of justice demand you do something different and give something up. So in this moment, if we're not careful, even in a place like Montclair, because particularly for folks who are living check to check, they tend to be more invisible. They're very present, but we don't think about them. We're like, oh, that's gotta be some, no, it's happening in your backyard. And it's your child's friend, and there's food insecurity. So if we start a process of listening differently and looking differently, we can support efforts like what you all are doing around community pods. We can support efforts to decenter our privilege and to challenge the hoarding that kind of gets baked into this way of American life.
No, thank you for that. It's certainly a challenge, but those words have been really helpful to us as we've been thinking about what that could look like here in Montclair, and certainly shape the initiatives that we're exploring. So I really appreciate that. And Genesis, I wanted to, there's a question here, and I know just because we have just a few minutes and people are very curious about the work that you're doing right now to support and train other peers in leadership as a way of kind of countering some of the stress that the few of you who maybe launched the Unity March have done. So I know that you all have already started that. Can you share a little bit about the work?
Yeah, okay. I'm glad you asked, because I sound kind of like, I don't know, we sound so like mysterious. And like initially we are like a decentralized group because we are nervous about like pushing young people out to the forefront when they don't really need to. Like prior to this, like I used to get calls at 1 a.m. from like reporters, like asking me questions. And again, like that is not normal. I try to be super nice all the time, but that's not cool. I'm a kid. You wouldn't do that to a white kid. You wouldn't do that to Becky. Like you're not allowed to call me at 1 a.m. That's a boundary that has to be set for kids. So we're super conscious of that. And we're still trying to decide if we should be decentralized or bring people out to the front and recognize them for the work that they do, but that's a conversation that should come later on. So we interviewed a little over 100 students who signed up in the high school to be a part of this. And we chose, I think we ended up with going with like 20 students. The rest of the students, just because like we wanted to keep it small circle, everybody has access to the work that we do. We're planning on starting like a mailing list to update people on what we do. It's just that like, we want to be able to organize and engage in like real discussion over Zoom, sometimes in person in small groups, like when we can. So we just try to keep it small. We are divided into, we want to be able to be kids and express our passion and use it as a form of advocacy. So we have students who are really great at math and love to read. So they're like our research analysts, and they get to be the ones to look through policies and be like, this is, or look through information and be like, this is what is really important for us to focus on. They then bring it to our next group that is outreach, where they love communicating with people. And so like our outreach group is sort of in charge of talking to different organizations and getting those skills, because I think we wanted to counter that idea of like sacrificing yourself. Like achieving justice doesn't really need to be any more incentivized, but I do want to normalize, like, if you, like as a child, your work, I keep saying child, but I'm a child. I want people to know that I'm a child, because they'll make me a 30-year-old woman if I don't like specify that. But as children, our how we grow and develop like should be valued in high school. So if we want to put all of our energy and time into something, we should be getting skills out of that. Like the least we deserve. So there are students who really love communicating with people and maybe in life like want to do something in communications. And there are people who, like you shouted out Mccoy. My friend Diego is going to be so happy to hear that, by the way, Professor Lewis. He runs like our media section where we make content that's engaging for people. And we sometimes, whenever information is being misguided, there are a group of people who can post the right things that are easily shared and easily accessible, and like the conversation continues going, like even when we're taking a break. We have our SARs, who are people who are comfortable being out in the forefront. I'm the one who are actually training the SARs. That looks like people being able to speak at Board of Education meetings, come to me with maybe policy chair meetings, and just like communicate with people, be the ones leading chants at protests. And those are people who basically are the figureheads who inspire people and are able to articulate their stories in a way that's empowering. We're also, like everybody in the group, we've been meeting with people who have, let's just say, firsthand experience with racism in Montclair. And so every month we make it apparent that we provide ourselves with that historical context and reach out to people and keep that close circle as students and always debrief on the information that we get. But we want to stay true to what is going on in Montclair. Like, we don't want this distorted version of how racism should be handled. Like, as students, we have our experience and our knowledge, and so we just want to get it from other people who can, maybe adults who can also help us with that. We also everybody has access to like switch around into our different groups, and it looks like us meeting like every couple of days, sometimes week to week, talking. We create the agenda that we want to discuss for like that month, and those are our issues, and everybody has access to learn how to read policy. Everybody will learn how to write op-eds and be in that position that we were in June. Like, we keep simulating that, but we're just focused on different issues. A lot of the demands that we asked for were implemented into the new anti-racism policy. We wrote I'll be very honest, we wrote an op-ed a few weeks ago to be like a little bit shady, because we're teenagers, like, what do you expect? And we made an article elaborating on the demands and also included the policies that coincide with our demands, to emphasize that the things that we asked for were actually deserved because they were already a part of Montclair policy. So it was to sort of ask this, or to pose this question: why are these not happening? Like, Montclair, if you want to keep face about being diverse, completely get it. You just have to follow through on that, you know? So like, on paper, we get to benefit from being seen as super diverse, but in practice, that's not happening. So that goes back to the whole distorted image that we've all received, and we keep talking to each other constantly to get the real story. And then we work amongst ourselves in a very like grassroots way, where given all of our talents and our passions, we come together and figure out what our next goals are going to be. So we're moving like very periodically, and right now we're trying to, me alongside the main organizers, we're planning succession plans, because we didn't realize we'd become seniors so fast. And so this, for the next couple of days, I think, so just this weekend, we're going to be sharing our agenda with both like our members that are a part of us, and then later on, like in our mailing list, so we can have those teachers and administration and parents be the ones who are also there to support us. But like I said earlier, it's like a very student-led situation, and I hope that makes sense to you guys. My brain operates in a very like organized-y way, but I promise, like, it's just lots of like constant communication and working, like constant communication and trust amongst each other, that everything sort of comes together when we're super honest and all at the same level of engagement. So that's why it's really important to make people feel empowered with these like new advocacy abilities, because anybody can do it. And it makes me so happy that it's like becoming normal to like want to speak at Board of Ed meetings and want to like read policy and write op-eds. So yeah, I hope that answers the question, Marciel.
It absolutely answers the question, Genesis, and
Awesome.
I think this really highlights the depth of your thinking, the strategic mind that you have, and I know that you have this group of peers who are doing this work with you, and it's just important, as Dr. or Lewis Mccoy says, for us to step back and just listen and kind of take it in, and let us know if you want to. We could share the link to the newsletter when you're ready to share that with folks. So we're at 7:24, and I just want to close this out with Dr. Lewis Mccoy. If you have just kind of a nugget of advice or insight or something, or how you want to something you want to leave for Genesis as we close out this portion.
Yeah, cool. So first, major thanks to Genesis and to all the youth organizers and workers, right? So the first thing I'll ask you all to continue to do is to dream big. And you're gonna meet adults who say that's not possible. Our job is actually to figure out how to make it possible. In a place like Montclair, if you said you wanted to develop a state-of-the-art STEM coding system that, I don't know, built dogs that ran around on Mars, people would be like, how do we make it happen? And when you say, what would it look like to have the curriculum that's part of CSJ all throughout Montclair High School? They're like, I can't imagine it. Nope. As adults, we have to expand and figure out how to make it possible. Number two, every movement, every good revolution begins with young people being at the center and leading the charge, and we appreciate that. The second to last thing I'll leave you with is that mistakes happen and they come with the territory. You all do not have to be perfect. And it's okay when a mistake happens. That's what we learn from. It keeps us humble, it keeps us connected, and it keeps us growing. And the last thing is that one of my favorite proverbs is that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So keep on rolling together, please.
Thank you. Genesis, I'm going to give you the last word. Do you want to say anything to Professor Mccoy, or just to this audience as we close out?
That's so broad. Let me think.
I know. I'm sorry. I should be a better.
No, I'm just kidding, Marcia. I am so joking with you. Something that is. I'm gonna be thinking about this till I go to sleep. Let me channel. I just want to share that, like, my experience is like, I'm speaking to high school students right now, and maybe the parents of high school students. It's really hard at the high school. It's not as it's not as easy as just having a conversation and speaking up. Like, I went through a lot to be in the position that I am now, but I promise you there are teachers and there are administrators and there are students who are there. I don't want it to have to take another 5 years, another bunch of murders filmed, another Marciel, like, grandiose event that is beautifully organized, by the way. Like, I don't want it to have to take so much for us to even believe the possibility of change happening locally and nationally. Like, quite honestly, I think, like, it's so hard for marginalized students to speak up because we are so conditioned to believe that our voices are inherently less than. So please, when we choose to speak up, reward that and recognize the power that we hold, like, and the potential that we hold to really make an impact. Because I wish that I've gotten a lot of support. I just wish that it was easier to get where I was. Like, I went through a lot of, like, mind gymnastics to constantly reaffirm myself, and now I'm finally at that space. But it really sucks when I meet, like, students who were who are freshmen in high school right now who are constantly apologizing to me just for being. Like, that's a mindset that we've harbored because it's really normalized at the high school, the intensity of racism. And like, I know that people want to understand, but stop asking Black kids to explain themselves like all the time, man. Like, we're not, sometimes we're just not at that point, because like I said earlier, sometimes culture is so normalized that it takes me a minute to register that something was wrong. And people will be like, aren't you this activist person? Da, 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 da. Yeah, but I'm 17 and I'm still learning and I'm still growing. So like, I don't know, there's a lot that I want to say, and you'll probably like receive a whole paragraph from me, Maciel. But to students, please speak up. And I know that it's really hard and it's not that easy, but like, I promise you, there is so much light in the end of the tunnel, and like, you have the support right now, this year at least, to come to me and come to my friends with any other concerns. And parents, like, don't just ask today, silence my fears and be there tomorrow. And because my biggest fear is that it's all going to end and I'm going to bore the suburban women. Like, I don't want to, it's not boring. Like, if we're engaged today, we're going to be engaged next week, and that'll probably be when we need you most. So just stay engaged and be open to having these conversations.
Thank you, Genesis. I think that that's very powerful. Those words are, stay engaged, because, you know, as you and others have said, right, this is not a moment, right? It's not even a movement. It's just what we should have been doing for so long, right? And we really appreciate you. We really appreciate you, Professor McCoy, as well, for giving your time and your insight. It has just been really the two of you. I'm so grateful, and I know that there are so many other people in this town. You know, we stand on very strong shoulders, and we'll continue to do this work. But you know, like I said, we're just so thankful to what you all have each done in your community, and Genesis for what you continue to do here in Montclair. So thank you both for tonight. We're going to close this portion of the evening. We will say goodbye to Professor Lewis McCoy and to Genesis. And for those of you who can stay on, please join us for the second part, which is for those of you who are, like I said before, have signed up to be watch group leader or watch group facilitators in the fall. This is the link that you will use to get to the next meeting, and you are in for a treat, because this workshop on the 4 Eyes of Oppression will be led by our amazing Montclair State professors, Tanya Maloney and Bree Pickauer. We're going to take just a tiny break but before you leave, also want to just make sure that I'm inviting, if you're not signed up to be a watch group facilitator or a watch group member, but you're curious, please stay on. It's only another hour, and you know, it's a Wednesday night. And you'll get to watch some of the clips of the film. You'll get some of the frameworks that our watch groups use to look at the films. And like I said, it's a treat to spend some time with Doctors Maloney and Pickauer. And I think we have one final slide. Is that right? Dory, let's see. I think we have our last slide that we have here. Let's see if she's gonna bring it up. Just a little bit of, you can see the QR codes there. If you are curious, or if you already decided you wanna be a watch group member, even if you don't know somebody who's leading a group, but you're really curious, you wanna be part of that group, please just take your phone up to the QR code there with your camera. It'll send you to the link where you can register to be a participant. And also, if you, can throw a little donation to this work, if you're so moved by these events. We will be having more events, and we really require and lean on the donors that are supporting this work to be able to bring events like this to you, and to really be able to continue the watch group process. We have a round of facilitators who are being trained this fall, and then we hope to bring another round in the spring. We really want to continue this work. We've gotten some great feedback from folks, feel that it is an important experience. And so we just, to do that, we do require some additional funding to make it happen. So, no donation is too small. Throw us $10, $5, whatever you can. It does make a difference in sustaining this work. So thank you all very much. And at this point, it's 7:33. Hopefully you have the links. And they're also in the chat, the links to join the second part. So please take a picture of the link or here, just click on it, because once we close this webinar, that link will be gone. So I'm just gonna give you a couple more minutes to click on that link, which is there, the link to join the second part. And we'll see you in a little bit. And for those of you who have to jump off, thank you so much for being a part of this, and look forward to a future event. Thank you.